And we were debating whether to cancel this, but alhamdulillah he insists to do it. But inshallah 10:15 we will leave him inshallah. He has to go to the airport. So I'll ask him to come.
حتى يرضى وله الحمد على الرضا وصلى اللهم وسلم على خير خلق الله وخاتم رسول الله محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن سن بسنته واهتدى بهديه. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and peace and blessing be upon his messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alaykum assalam. The topic is the economic aspects, the Islamic alternative. I think it's a very important topic. I'm sure that you will have faced many decisions to make in investment, housing, and how to adhere to the Islamic principles. Dr. Badawi, I know that we need to gain every minute of this lecture here. He has several outlines to have to follow. Actually, he would like to answer many of the questions that you have in mind, so I will leave this to him.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I just got used to that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وذروا ما بقي من الربا إن كنتم مؤمنين فإن لم تفعلوا فأذنوا بحرب من الله ورسوله وإن تبتم فلكم رؤوس أموالكم لا تظلمون ولا تظلمون. The free translation: O believers, fear Allah and leave whatever remained of riba if you are truly believers. If you don't, be advised of a war to be waged against you by Allah and His Messenger. But if you repent, you have only your principle. You don't subject yourself to injustice, nor do injustice to others. I'm not aware of any other ayah in the Quran that really tell people, if you don't do that, there is a war to be waged against you by Allah and His Messenger. Nor do I know of any person who can say, that's okay, it's not that serious, because I can fight courageously in that battle. This morning presentation, inshallah, will not be an academic lecture. In fact, a number of questions and issues were compiled, because you can approach the topic from a variety of ways, but the number of questions have been compiled, so inshallah I try to address them because they seem to reflect common concern among many, and then I might add a few points on the positive side in terms of possible alternatives. One of the questions here basically says, what is the definition of riba from the Sharia standpoint? How does that differ from the definition of interest that is paid by banks? I'll try to be as concise as possible. Well, oftentimes a lot of people say that there is a difference between interest and usury, and that difference does exist in dictionaries. You open any English dictionary, it defines usury simply as excessive interest, not just any interest. And as such, some people would say the ayah in the Quran is to be translated and leave usury, and that's why I didn't translate it. I said riba, left it as it is, riba. But we have to realize the Quran was not revealed in English. So the usages and difference of terminology in one language does not necessarily apply to the other. So just like the term jihad and other thing that has been misunderstood, like jihad mistakenly translated holy war, where in the Quran the equivalent term to holy war, harb muqaddasa, never occurs. So we have to stick to the proper terms because they do have a meaning. The word riba comes from yarbu, and actually the Quran says itself, use it as a verb. وَمَا أَتَيْتُم مِّن رِبًا لِيَرْبُوَ فِي أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ فَلَا يَرْبُو عِندَ اللَّهِ. Yarbu or riba means something in excess. Yarbu yazid, increase, which in the Sharia definition means any excess that you get beyond the capital, a guaranteed type of excess, without full participation in profit and or loss, based on the rule al-ghunmu bil-ghurm. As you have the possibility of winning, you have also the possibility of losing. So in that sense we can say then that any guaranteed excess beyond the capital without participation in trade or participation in profit and loss would fall definitely within the definition of riba. A second question, but that second question stems from the same way of thinking also in terms of interest versus usury. But sometimes people even refer to the Quran to support this. And they say that what is really forbidden is not any excess, but excessive excess, exaggerated or exploitative interest, but not the small one. Okay? What is the reference? They say the Quran says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَأْكُلُوا الرِّبَا أَضْعَافًا مُضَاعَفًا. O believers, don't eat riba أضعافًا, multiplied twice and thrice. And they say, yeah, so that speaks really about very excessive thing, that when you charge 300%, أضعافًا, because ضعف at least. ضعف means like 200, twice as much. أضعافًا actually is at least 300% or more. So yeah, maybe the Quran only refers to this. This is again a big fallacy really, because on two grounds. On economic grounds, if you look at it, accounting speaking, and in terms of the legal argument made. First of all, the legal argument is fallacious, because when the Quran sometimes uses these terms, it does not necessarily say that the small of that is bad, but to bring to attention the gravity of the problem, or the gravity of the sin. So even though it might put it in as big, strong terms, it doesn't mean that the small part is haram. It's just like exactly the intoxication. ما أسكر كثير فقليل حرام. You know, even if you drink a lot of something that has very small percentage of alcohol to get intoxicated, even a small amount is haram. So to say أضعافا مضاعفة is just to show the greed that is normally associated with riba and the accumulation of wealth without participation and effort in the hands of those who have control over capital without taking any risk. Not to say that only the exaggerated, not the small one, that is forbidden. Both are forbidden. Secondly, even from the economic accounting standpoint, the ayah makes sense. أضعافا مضاعفة. Because even if you have, suppose, 5%, is that, most people consider very moderate, 5% interest. And obviously most people, especially in most loans, would go beyond a year, like 2 or 3 years. Okay? You're paying 5% the first year. Even if you pay part of that, you pay almost about the same amount the second year, almost the same amount the third year. It might decline a little bit. Multiply 5 by almost 3. What is the total? 15%. The ayah did not say the principal and riba أضعافا مضاعفة. It says riba, the thing that is in excess. So the first year, the thing that's in excess is 5%. The second year, it's almost 5%. Third year, if it's 5 years, it is أضعافا مضاعفة still. Even the smallest interest, when it's multiplied by so many years, it is multiplied so many times, not the principal. It doesn't have to be 100%. So neither argument really seemed to hold water. Then some people might say, and that's another question here, that some people say that it is a necessity after all, even though it's haram, but there is a rule in Sharia that things that are forbidden can be resorted to in case of necessity. Sometimes the word necessity or darura is used in a rather loose way. Sometimes it's applied to something very trivial, and sometimes it's used to reverse even a basic rule. You see, we can use the term darura in the colloquial sense, the general meaning. But when you really define darura from the Islamic jurisprudence point of view, the darura that the Prophet ﷺ referred to, or the Quran referred to, فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ غَيْرَ بَاغٍ, anyone who's compelled. Anyone who's compelled, that means only issues that pertains to life-saving or preservation of health. And of course, the typical example, we all know that somebody starved and it's either death or eating some food which is not halal. In that case, an exception is made only for the amount absolutely needed, and without really feeling it's good, just to maintain life until there's some other solution. So to say that we have to deal in riba here because it is a necessity, it doesn't seem to really apply except in very theoretical academic cases that I've never heard of. The academic case here would be, as I heard it one time from Sheikh Qaradawi, is that suppose somebody is starving. It's not that he wants a nice car or even necessary old car. Somebody starved, so the maintenance of his life is contingent on getting some money. And he goes and seek charity from Muslims and nobody cares. They say, no, you go and starve, that's okay with us. Suppose he goes to look charity for anyone from anyone else, and there is absolutely no way that he can maintain his life except by going to the bank and borrowing some money with interest. In that case, it would be permissible to save his life, and the ithm, the guilt, would be on those, especially Muslims, who neglected to look after his needs. But how many of you here have heard of any case like that in the whole of the continent of North America? None. Even in the so-called third world, as they call it. It doesn't happen even because if you don't have anything, the bank will not lend you anyway. Nobody would lend you. So I mean, it's a very, very unlikely type of situation. Other than that, there is some other aspect. It's true in Islamic jurisprudence, which is called al-hajiyat. Al-hajiyat means something which is not absolutely necessary to save life, but if something is not really that forbidden, something, let's say, detestable, but there is some need, but not necessarily life-saving thing, then something like that could be resorted to. But since riba has been mentioned with taghlid, with very strict ayat about it, then one cannot say, yeah, I have need, but not necessarily necessity, and that also would justify it, because people have infinite type of needs. So that, again, I'd say, it doesn't justify it. It's just like somebody walking into a restaurant and said, I am extremely hungry, and all items in the restaurant contain some pork, so ma'alish, this is not the necessity for saving life, but it's a need anyway, so let's not be too strict about it. It's the same logic. Another question. It says, some people say, but isn't, for example, having a home or car darura shar'iyya, is that not a necessity in this country? Again, I hope that this has been answered already. Am I going to starve if I don't have a car? Even if the car is necessary to go to work, I can still use some public transport. I could buy a used car instead of a fancy one within my limits and abilities. I don't see that really. A home. And here I'd like to refer to a fatwa that some people refer to but have not read it, because I did read it myself. I read the text of it. Did some of you here, any of you heard of an alleged fatwa by a council of ulama in Kuwait saying that buying homes on mortgage is okay? By show of hands, did anyone hear? You heard of that? A few years back. You heard of that? Okay. Did any of you have a chance to read it actually? Yeah, this is very important, because a fatwa is based on a question. It's not a generalization. And I did read the question and the answer given. The question was sent by Sheikh Muhammad al-Hanuti from New Jersey. And he was quite specific in his question. He said, what is the verdict about a person who lives here in North America and must have a home to live in? This is not necessarily, don't quote me exactly word for it, but this is the gist of his question. He needs a home because it's impossible to have any other means. In other words, you can't have a tent, for example, in the snow. He has to have a home, but he has so many children, and he keeps looking for any place to rent and they refuse. That might be partly true, of course, in some places. You know, they can't rent unless, and he cannot afford to rent 2 apartments. He can't. And the only way for him to have a shelter for his family in these circumstances is to buy a home, and if he doesn't have the money and cannot get it from anywhere, he was forced to buy it on mortgage. You see the question? The question is more important than the answer. Before even I tell you what was the answer, what would you say based on this rule of Sharia? Shelter is a necessity like food. If somebody sleeps with his family and children in the street, they will freeze to death. Right? So that's a legitimate necessity. That's how they give the fatwa, the verdict on that, on the basis of that question. For someone to go around, and say, there has been already a fatwa about that, I think it's something that we need to be careful. I do have, like I say, a text with the stamp and everything on it in my files at home. Okay, another question. How about inflation and the loss of value of money? And even part of the question say, did that happen also in the past? As to whether it happened in the past or not, I cannot answer for sure, but I think a lot of economists would agree that it is the Western style of economy, capitalistic system, that is likely to give rise to inflation, perhaps much more than any system that we had before. But the argument that I can take interest because after all I'm only keeping the real value of my money because of inflation is not a justification. It's just because it is a result of a wrong system, interest-based system, and Islam is not responsible for that. And if a person indeed is afraid of losing the real value of his money, Islam encourages investment, and we'll talk about that at the end in the concluding remark. Why don't you invest it? But to say, no, don't want to take any risk, just leave it in the bank, and the interest would compensate for inflation, is not a good argument, really. Okay, another question. It says that, is it possible to accept Reba because America is Darul Harb, an abode of war, or there's no abode of peace here in their relationship with the Muslim world? Well, I know what is behind that, because some people refer to some opinion in the Hanafi school of fiqh, but sometimes even it's exaggerated, where originally the position taken was that if a Muslim is living in Darul Harb, that is in non-Islamic countries which is not at peace with Muslims, then it may not be advisable, it's not advisable to apply hudud on the person. Hudud, which is the mandatory punishments on the person. In other words, a Muslim living in America and he commits theft, even if there's a group of Muslims who might be able to apply had to him or cut his hand, for example, they shouldn't do it. You know why? Obviously, there is greater fitna, and this is a basic rule in Sharia, to weigh the benefits and harms. If he gets scared from the application of the hudud, which is a very severe punishment, he might apostate, he might run away, and he will find refuge and protection there. But some people extend it too far and said somehow, well, maybe in that case, if you deal with them in riba, with their agreement, so that there is not much injustice done to them, then this is okay. I find that opinion, with my habit also of respecting legitimate opinions, but being critical also, to say the least, is a marjuh opinion, which is a weak, very weak opinion. And the evidence to me appears right in the Quran itself. Because to take the attitude that taking riba from a non-Muslim, it's okay because they're not Muslims, but not to do that with Muslims because of the difference between Darul Harb and Darul Islam. This attitude has been condemned in the Quran already. Speaking about the Israelites, the Quran says, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَالُوا ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَالُوا لَيْسَ عَلَيْنَا فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ سَبِيلٌ. لَيْسَ عَلَيْنَا فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ سَبِيلٌ. That's because they said, we are not to be blamed, that is, in our dealing with the Gentiles. In fact, in reading the Bible myself, I found a specific verse that speaks about that. It says, You don't lend your brother, what is meant by brother here, a Jew. You don't lend your brother in interest or with usury, which obviously means for others it's okay, but for your brother you don't do that. So this kind of distinction in moral behavior, I am just with the Muslim and unjust with the other, is not a justification. The Quran says you have to be just even to your enemy. So that doesn't really sound correct. Another question. But isn't interest as it exists today different really from usury, because the bank take your money, invest it and make money out of that, so you're only getting your share of that. So isn't that a sort of trade? It looks like the question is new, but it's not new. The ayah that I was just I was stumbling now, I mixed the two ayahs. ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. That is because they said trade is like riba. Trade and usury is the same thing. You're making commerce, you get in share. But it says, but Allah made commerce legitimate and lawful and made riba haram. So while there might be superficial similarity on the surface, they're not the same. And if you look at it from the economic standpoint, they're not the same really. Why? Because in the case of trade, we all know when you buy shares in General Motors or Chrysler or IBM, what are you doing there? You're buying a small share in that company, minute share, 1/1,000,000th of whatever assets. Okay? And when the company makes its operation and finalize their accounts, and then come up with the gross profits and net profits, and then they determine what part goes to reserves and what part goes to dividends, and you get a dividend based on the performance of the company. And that's why you always hear dividend went up, went down, the company lost a little, the shares value go up or down. So trade here means complete sharing in the profit and loss. In the case of riba, that's not the case. Whether you lose or make profits, you still have to pay that particular percentage. And sometimes they insist on taking the interest before the principal. Do you know when you pay, for example, $550 as mortgage, you know how they calculate it in the beginning, when you have the mortgage in the very beginning? Actually, maybe $535 out of that is to make sure that the entire interest on the whole $50,000 loan that you have is paid first before the $15 go to your principal. So there's no comparison between trade and usury, neither Islamically nor even from the economic standpoint. There's big difference between both. But if the bank, for example, and we'll come to that, is acting as an Islamic investment bank where you're sharing in the profit and loss and you're getting profit, not interest, that's different issue altogether. Another question. It says but isn't acceptance of riba with the excuse that this would enhance economic progress and benefit the Muslims is better? So isn't the restriction on riba stand in the way of Muslim economic progress? There could be two responses to that. From the purely Islamic standpoint, al-ghaya la tubarrir al-wasila. The good end or good objective does not justify an unlawful means. Or else I would say, I'd like to raise some money for the Peace Islamic School, so I make a lottery. Or better even, I can make a dancing party and get a dancer or something. You get a lot of people coming. Even non-Muslim would be willing to contribute. You know what I mean? To have a good objective, it doesn't mean that we have to any means of that. Yes, we need economic progress, but if something has been forbidden by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't do it. Or one country says, all right, let's open our country for tourists without any restriction. Let them go in the streets in bikinis. Let them drink in public and bring all evils and AIDS and intoxicants with them and destroy our society, because after all, getting hard currency. Tourism is very essential for the needs of the people and progress of the economy. And you know that there is absolutely no barakah in things that come from haram. You get a lot and it all goes. And Allah has His ways also of inflicting punishment, that you think you're getting money. If it's coming from a haram source, all of a sudden you go. It happens on the individual level and national levels, by the way. On individual level, you find people amassing wealth from haram sources. And they think that they're on top of the world, and all those rigid fundamentalist people, I hate the word fundamentalist, by the way, I'm just saying that they use it in a derogatory sense. The rigid ones, these mullahs and all this, are the ones who are just keeping poor. And all of a sudden you find that rich person is losing his money. I know personally of some cases. People who became, some person in one city was called that this man owns half of the city. And all of a sudden the situation changed in the real estate market, and he declared bankruptcy. Bankruptcy. It's a person amass wealth and gets a very serious disease, terminal disease and so on, and at that time he regrets. He said, I wish I was living even in a hut with my health. So now it happened on the national level. Some countries go to war, for example, thinking that this would promote jobs and economic prosperity. They come back from the war that displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they find disaster after disaster after disaster are befalling them in the economic sense, even purely economic sense that they were hoping to improve. But also from the economic standpoint, not just Islamic. Who said that riba is the only means of achieving economic development? Why do we have to have this mental slavery to Western ideologies and systems? You can adopt good wisdom that doesn't contradict with our Islam. But who said that this is the only way of achieving economic progress? And inshallah, in the conclusion, I might suggest that even though it might be difficult, there are still some legitimate ways of progress without resorting to interest. After all, Islamic civilization was on top of all things, the superpower in the world, and continued in great prosperity for centuries. And it was not interest-based. How did it succeed? Of course, they have been changed in circumstances, but again, relative to their circumstances, relative to their time, they were a huge economic powerhouse. And there was no interest involved. There was even not just barakah, but economically speaking, it worked. I don't like to make stereotypes, but you know, many of the famous economists, you know what their allegiance is? You know who is the most famous economist in America who won a Nobel Prize? Friedman. And Samuelson also, Paul Samuelson. Okay? You know from the name what their allegiance. And you know the close relationship between financial institutions in this country and in Europe, in the world in general, and the people who really control and reap the greatest benefits. No wonder we find this promotion of the idea that, you know, the interest-based system is the best system really that achieves economic progress. And the world seems to be duped and accepting that, because there have been no serious attempt to look into another alternative that could not only be viable, could even be better. But even economists who specialize and should know better, very few of them start to question that. One of them is a colleague of mine at St. Mary's University who wrote a paper in an economics conference actually defending, because he's a deeply religious Christian and he happened to believe also that interest is wrong. And he had a paper actually arguing on economic grounds that actually there could be a better alternative to the interest-based system. I don't want to get to detailed technical aspect of that, but there are economists who argue. But of course they're minority. They shut off quickly, you know, because this is not the wave that is going on. Another question, it says, how about accepting riba simply because circumstances changed and there are social pressures? Well, again, the Prophet ﷺ warned us that you will follow the path of those before you, shibran bishibr, just, you know, foot by foot. Even if they enter into hujra dabbin, if you enter into a hole, an animal's hole in the ground, you would go after them. So to say circumstances changes to the point of rendering invalid the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very strange really, because there is no command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is so invalid, hasha lillah, or unwise, that you have at any point of history to say that this is absolutely irrelevant. There could be no point of history where you say, all right, circumstances changed, so adultery really should not be regarded as bad. The same for riba, the same for theft. These are overarching principles that does not change with the time. Some people, by the way, argue also, they say, look, even some religions have already changed a great deal of their views about moral aspects and sexuality and interest. And you said, I can quote you X, Y, Z sects of X, Y religions, who do not adopt this old fundamentalist view and all of this. Not only this, if you want to respond to that, you say these people even changed matters of belief. They change even the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they keep developing theology because it's all man-made, and if it's man-made, it's okay. I mean, if it's man-made, then other men can come and change it. So that's not an excuse. You said, oh, but these religions developed, they are keeping with the times. They're keeping with the opinion of humans. So there's difference between adapting or understanding or application of Sharia in changing circumstances, which is admissible. Circumstances does affect application of details, but not cancellation of principles. I just like to conclude with two more issues. One issue and then just a conclusion. Some say that, or a question say that some people try to look for some fatwa to justify what they want to do, and they follow the famous Egyptian proverb, حطها في رقبة عالم واطلع منها سالم. You want to do something, so you somehow squeeze a fatwa from the mouth of a alim to put it in his neck and get out of it peacefully. In other words, even if your heart, no, it's not right, but Sheikh so and so said it. Alhamdulillah, I'm not thinking about it. And that seemed to overlook the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, استفتي قلبك وإن أفتوك الناس وأفتوك وأفتوك. Ask your heart, even if people give you verdict and verdict and verdict. Of course, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not say, without any knowledge, ask your heart. That if you don't know much or you don't have the proper Islamic attitude and say, all right, that glass of wine looks okay. People give me all kind of fatwa, but I ask my heart, and my heart gave me the fatwa that it's okay. Of course, that's not what is intended behind. But I understand that hadith to refer to the fact that because the haram is haram, that some things are questionable, and in your heart you feel it is not right. And then you find somebody says it is okay. And you look into their evidence and you're not quite persuaded of that evidence, but you're not on the same level of knowledge to argue with them. Get my point? So in that case you said, all right, Jazakallah khair, but still I'm not going to do it. So it's okay for you to do it, but you're not convinced in your own heart. That's okay. You said, taqwa, as a way of taqwa, I try to avoid it. There's not much damage that's going to happen if I don't do it. That's fine with me. But it's not the reverse, really. So this is a question of attitude, of just putting in somebody else's neck. This is what I call, I use a term for that, shopping for a fatwa. When you go shopping, how much is this, that, and that? You compare prices, quality, argue, bargain, and that's the best bargain. I'm not saying again that one should not seek the fatwa that has yusr, because yusr is part of Islam also. There's no question about that. I hope I will not be misunderstood that you should always look for the strictest fatwa. But I mean, if there are some legitimate fatwas that in your heart you know that. The hadith also is quite clear on that. Al-halalu bayn wal-haramu bayn, that halal is clear and haram is clear, and between them there is an area, you might say a hazy area, mushtabihat, there is shubha. Most people don't know. So whoever keep away from this shubhat, which is not clearly halal or haram, haram of course in the strictest sense, then a person is better to keep away from them. And finally, just a positive note, I hope I didn't take too long, let's keep it informal. As some people might say, all right, we keep often hearing haram, haram, haram. When are we ever going to hear halal? And this is the point was raised last night also at the end of the youth discussion, that we have to think of alternatives rather than simply say this is haram. But we have to be patient. We have to have the right attitude and the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we don't just give up because it's difficult. There's so much pressure. And this applies to all of our lives, not only economic lives. And when you have a daughter, when she goes to the high school and she wants to have hijab, for example, or she's encouraged to have hijab, it's not easy. She might be thought as a Muslim and i.e. terrorist. She might be harassed. There's always a price for being committed to one's faith. but not to the point of having our life impossible. The nature of Sharia is that it wouldn't put us in an impossible situation. It might be somewhat difficult situation, a situation that requires sacrifice, a situation that might require control on our greed, but never does Sharia require us to be in a thing that we can never bear. And that's a rule in the Quran. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah will never charge any soul with any burden beyond what it can bear, beyond its ability. For that reason, I must say that giving this limitation, because of the time we're living in, the pressures, and the things that you cannot change by yourself, there are a variety of ways if we're thinking of investment. First of all, a person can invest by himself if he has the skill and ability. That's fine, alhamdulillah. Then he can make sure in his trade that he avoid haram and deal with permissible things. Unless something he cannot help, of course, that's beyond his ability. Secondly, if the capital needed for a project is more than what one person can provide, a number of people can share together, like partnership, and that's investment, and it's halal. It's a good alternative. Thirdly, if there is lack of expertise, that some people have the capital, some people have the expertise, you can have sharing of profit with certain percentage going to capital and others going to people providing labor or expertise. That's also legitimate. Fifthly, you could have also what we mentioned earlier and promised to come back to, something like Islamic banks. By the way, I'm using Islamic banks in a specific sense because some brothers complained to me that some of the banks that call itself Islamic banks might be also involved in something forbidden. I'm talking about trusted Islamic banks where they have Hay'at Raqaba Shar'iyya, like there's a scholar, known scholar, respected scholar like Sheikh Qaradawi and others who are in control in terms of judging the operations of the bank. If you have a truly Islamic bank, it is also a form that is available for everyone, even with a small amount. Those who cannot even have sharing with others or do not want to take larger risk, reasonable risk, but not a big risk. And the basic way it operates, essentially, really, is like an investment bank. You deposit your money, but you're not only a depositor, you're depositor, investor at the same time. The bank take these funds, use it in halal operations like financing, imports, whatever they do, get the profit, take out of that their expenses, so the net profit then would be like dividend actually, to be distributed among those who deposited money depending on the length where they kept their deposit. This is the simplest format. And it has been successful. It's been very successful, in fact, in many places, to the point that in one particular country it was so successful that commercial banks were jealous, and certain circles in the West who do not want to see Islam operate in reality exerted pressures on governments to strike at those highly successful Islamic banks that were giving much higher, not only just an alternative that is somewhat acceptable or with sacrifice, there was barakah. They were giving much higher return even than the commercial banks were doing. And they destroyed them in that particular case. So the possibility is available there. The issues then that pertain not to investment, but even to the daily lives of Muslims, issues like cars and homes, for example. I mentioned very briefly, because some of you must have heard that before, a very, very successful experience, alhamdulillah, in Toronto, Canada. And it's only about 10, 11 years old. It's not that really. However, the phenomenal success within these few years is just amazing. I think the assets now is definitely over 15 million. It might be more than that. Islamic cooperative housing. And the idea is very simple. I don't wish to go in detail. Some of you might have access to my humble little tips in album 5 that deal with the economic and political system of Islam. The last tape, it's 1 hour tape, gives an outline. So I cannot summarize 1 hour in a few minutes, but in essence, really, it's like people putting their savings together, and instead of putting it in the bank, they're buying shares in that corporation, $100 each, let's say, okay? And then if you want to buy a home, you will be required to have a certain down payment, like the 20% or whatever. And the corporation, the housing corporation, would pay the rest in cash. So there is no riba involved whatsoever. They pay it to the seller. Okay? And then every month you pay rent, because it's not your property yet. But you take also part of that rent because you're a co-owner, you have 20%. So you pay actually really the rent that belongs to other investors, but you buy back also every year a number of shares in the same house. So you build up your equity while you're renting. So you pay rent and you acquire equity for yourself. And it goes gradually until you have all the shares of the house. That means it's all paid for. Of course, I'm not going into details about what happened in the changes of prices of the property, how to share the appreciation of value. This is no problem. In these tapes, there is some model explaining with numbers even. It's some sort of scenario with numbers. And alhamdulillah, it's operating very effectively. And those who have interest can write to them in Toronto. They can give you just a copy of the bylaws and how it operates. That very system, before it was applied in Toronto, was applied even in Halifax, in our city, not on a big corporation level, a few individuals even. One brother wants to buy a home or want to get out of the mortgage, and somebody put 5,000, 10,000, 15, they put it together. They bought shares in his house, rented to him, and let him also acquire his equity, and it did work in a very blessed, alhamdulillah, and very successful way. I'm giving that as an example of great success, that if you talk about that, if you have talked about that 20 years ago, even 20 years ago, somebody might say you're too theoretical. You don't just want to accept the change and reality of Western society. You're just trying to think with the strange old mentality. Nobody would have expected that success. It is a phenomenal success. It spread in some other places. I was visiting Australia one time. They got so enthusiastic, they started a small one. There's one in the United States also, the MSI, even though it needs more expertise, perhaps to operate better, but it is also trying to do the same. I'm not sure about Tulsa. I heard there's some project similar to that, alhamdulillah. I'm very happy to hear this. It hasn't really caught up as one would expect because a lot of people are not aware of it or how it works. So that's why I would recommend highly, if you want to get some idea, borrow the tape. Don't worry, I'm not making commercials for tapes. There's absolutely no penny in royalty except dua of people. So don't worry about that. Anyone who calls us for permission to reproduce any of our da'wah material or our tapes or our videos, I have absolutely no problem with that so long as it's not made for personal profit. Okay. So borrow the tape or copy it, the 10th tape in album 5, to get some idea about it. Discuss it in your community. Maybe some people might get enthusiastic. You might get even the video or copy the video. It's also available in video so that you can see the numbers. And maybe that might generate some more places where it can be applied. About cars, finally. This is something that some people say, how could you deal with that also? As you know, many scholars said that it is permissible that you sell an item to be paid with higher price if the payment is deferred. This is not supposed to be a backdoor to interest, because if you look at it without this consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you could say, all right, when I buy the car from the dealer tells me it is 15,000 if you pay it full in cash, but I'll give you bay'a mu'ajjal, I give you deferred payment that you pay it over 5 years at the rate of $529.75 per month. And in reality, he did nothing but going through his table of interest, the current interest rate, and you have the amount and the number of months of amortization, and the figure is there. But to please you, since you're a Muslim, all right, no, I'm not selling you with riba. It's like the bay'a mu'ajjal. And I heard of some brothers, even from the like Gulf areas and so on, who tell me that there are some merchants sometimes who try to use this kind of backdoor. Obviously, as you know, the rule, at-tahayul ala al-haram haram. You know, to go from a backdoor and to play legal tricks to commit something which is haram is also haram. You know, when the Quran speaks about the Israelites, when they were forbidden to fish on their Sabbath, and Allah sent lots of fish. So to make tahayul, they make barriers so that fish cannot escape to sea, and then they wait until the Sabbath is over and go and catch the fish. So this is a sort of, again, legal tricks. What is meant really by bay'a mu'ajjal is that, all right, I have this house, I can sell it to you if you pay me now 100,000. But now if you can't pay me unless you pay it in 2 or 3 years or 3 installments, 1 year from now, 2 years and 3 years, then of course I'd be foregoing, you know, this capital that I'm having. I'm not gaining anything. So the price in that case would be 125, for example, or 120, without necessarily saying, all right, when you're delayed for 1 month, there is 7% interest and so on. In any case, this legal base has been used by the same cooperative. Actually, they have another branch. They call it MSA or ISNA membership service for buying cars. But of course, with the encouragement that if indeed you can't afford to buy an expensive new car, don't get in debt, and that's the best. I'm not saying buying a junk that runs for 5 days or 5 kilometers, whichever comes first. That could be like swallow your money. But they could be a decent, reasonable used car that is within your capacities. But it's better in that case not to resort to that. But if you have to buy, so what they do is to buy the car. You look around to find what car you want to buy. They buy the car. They resell it to you for a higher price or amortization. But again, like I said, without this question of interest. I said some fuqaha allow that because I'm sure that some scholars would have some reservation on it also because it might have the resemblance of riba and it is subject to possible abuse. But there is a better solution. They didn't do that in Toronto possibly because of some of the legal regulations and requirements which might vary from state to state or one country to the other. I think a safer approach perhaps would be the lease. Inshallah. By leasing a car, as you know, you're leasing an equipment. It could apply also to medical equipment for doctors or whatever. You're leasing, and then at the end of the lease, the person is free to buy it at a given price, either agreed to or negotiated at the time. These are only a few examples that the doors are not totally locked. Yes, there are difficulties and struggle that we have to go through. We have to sacrifice even some benefits whenever it goes against our convictions. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us all and give us both taqwa and success, materially and spiritually, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Jamal. It's already 10:16, and as you know that Brother Jamal's flight is 10:50. So, and I'm sure that you probably have so many questions.
We can meet at the gate.
I actually have an array of questions, but I did listen to Dr. Badawi's tapes about this subject and several other lectures actually he gave. And I agree with him that it is very important that you could probably obtain those tapes. I think they are available here. And I don't really think there will be any time for any questions.
I think I can take a risk of maybe about 5 minutes or so.
Okay,
capsulized
sure.
Questions and capsulized answers.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Make it brief, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
I have comments as well as few questions.
I have 5 minutes for all the brother who raised their hands. So if you could kindly just give a question and brief, inshallah.
You have suggested few alternatives. Buying cars and mortgage and all these. But this is not actual problem. Whether it is in this country, in the Western world, or in the Muslim countries, there is only one economic system. Whether you are in the Middle East or in the Southeast Muslim countries, there is only one economic system. Now that economic system affects everybody. Now, what about the retirement benefits? What about retirement benefits?
Okay.
Now, if an individual here or anywhere in the world, any country, what he is expected to do.
Okay, very briefly.
Okay. Now, second thing is, as I understood,
if you take too long, you have to fly me to Toronto to catch my flight.
Okay. As I understood, Allama Yusuf Ali's translation quoted this, that Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu mentioned that he wished Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could have, or if he wished that he would have given some more information about Reba, but unfortunately there was none, so there is no interpretation on this.
Okay,
so third thing is that this matter, was this ayah was promulgated after the establishment of Islamic society, not before.
Okay.
So
can I hear all the questions quickly, and inshallah, as much as time allows, because some questions might require more time, to the point of missing the flight. So I'll hear all the question quickly, and then if something I can answer very quickly, inshallah, fine. If not,
Yes, brother.
inshallah, other
You might
opportunities.
give
Jazakallah.
the mic
Just
to-
capsulized question. And
We could hear it.
This is the first time I appreciate your knowledge about distinguishing between the nominal and real interest rate and the inflation rate. And I used to do something that I discovered today that is haram, this interest rate. My justification was the inflation rate.
Alhamdulillah.
And you today make it clear that it's wrong.
Alhamdulillah.
Now, the point is that all of us, when we get income, we have either to consume and save. All of us have saving. With the life nowadays, we don't have trust. It's broken. So what's the best? Why don't you establish, for example, a company or
Okay.
a reliable place that we put our money in, and then will be halal, and in the meantime, it will be acceptable. And I see, I am risk averse,
Okay.
and most of us like that. What should we do?
Okay.
We have problem, you know.
Jazakallah khair. Okay.
Okay, brother.
Yes, brother, it's a quick question. What is your opinion about owning stocks in different companies?
Okay.
Not necessarily, which is violating Islam, for example, telecommunication and things like that.
Okay. Other questions? Quickly, inshallah.
How about the service charge usually added into the bill, like electricity? About the
Finance
service charge,
Service
Finance
charge.
they
charge.
said service charge is
Okay.
$1 or $2 for
Okay.
being late with the bills. Thank you.
Okay.
Just I want to talk about the 0% interest, like for Circuit City or Best Buy. Are we allowed to do so and get into the contract since it is facet contract?
Okay.
It has late.
Okay.
Sometimes.
Okay.
All right.
Assalamu alaikum. How about
Have to-
having credit cards and using it, and
Okay.
while you use it,
Okay.
the shoppers are when the shops are charged some amount.
Okay.
Just a quick question about the people who are already brothers or already involved in mortgages or cars. How could they get out of it?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because
Okay.
even if I say one word about it, it's
How about the 401k plans that many employers,
want
401k
retirement.
plans that many employers offer to their employees? There are some interest and bonds and things like that involved.
For 4K, brother, the retirement plan? Okay.
Oh, retirement
Yes,
plan.
yeah.
Okay.
My question, just last one please, Assalamu alaikum, is relating to investment activities. If you buy the stock of a company whose business is legitimate, for example, if you buy an airline stock but they serve liquor, you buy
7
Walmart
items
stock
already.
but they sell pork. Can you
Okay,
tell me,
brothers, there were 7 items already. We'll ask
Okay.
Brother Jamal to go ahead and elaborate.
Very
on
quickly,
that. Go
very
ahead,
quickly.
brothers.
On the question of retirement, you know that the retirement actually constitute part of your own contribution and part of the contribution of the employer. The only questionable part, these parts are not questionable because the employer's contribution to your retirement is your fringe benefit, and what you pay is taken out of your salary anyway. There's absolutely no question about that. The questionable thing is the way sometimes these retirement funds are invested. However, let me give you a number of alternatives that we can work on. One is already established in Toronto. They have an Islamic RRSP. And some laws allow you to do that so long as you have arrangement with a bank, and then you control with the bank the way of investing those funds. Secondly, if you can't help it and the employer provided, there is also a possibility of arranging, some employers provide you 2 alternate modes of investments. One largely based on interest, the other is like a holding company with only a small amount that they might be investing in bond. Obviously, that second one would be better. And if you feel even that there is any haraj in your own heart, you can keep your contribution, your employer's contribution. If you feel that any part of that dividend, a percentage of that comes from a questionable source, you can just use it the same way that interest can be used, that is to give it in charity without considering that part of your zakah. About the issue of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh being quoted as having some questions, he's a great Sahabi, but he's not the only one, and there's also the consensus of Sahaba. Umar was confused in another issue. It doesn't really belittle him in any way, but we cannot stick to one isolated case and base something to cancel the consensus of Sahaba and Fuqaha on the basis of that. Secondly, what kind of Islamic investment can we put our saving in? Even in North America here, you have, for example, the Amana Trust Fund, even though I'd like to examine further how they do it, but at least they claim to have Islamic investment. This was sponsored by NATE originally. And basically, it's a holding company, but they get instructions from a Muslim board as to what investment are acceptable or non-acceptable. Stocks. There is difference of opinion. Some are more strict on this, but there are scholars who say that buying stocks in itself is not haram because stocks is not like bonds. In stocks, you share in profit and loss. But you make sure that the major operation of the company you're buying stock in is not haram. So you can't buy stocks in Seagram, the wine company, and so on. Some raise a question mark, and that's why some people even consider it not permissible, that there is no company that does not deal in interest in some way or the other or keep funds in the bank. Some scholars responded to that by saying that this is umum al-balwa, that this is something, as the Prophet ﷺ expected, a time where if you don't deal with riba, you have a dust of it. It's totally unavoidable. Even your salary might contain part of interest. But that's not part of your intention, and you're not taking it in the form of interest. So if the major operation is like that, fine. If you feel still uncomfortable, get the financial report of the company. If you find that 5% of their income came from interest, take it and deal with it in the same way you deal with riba money coming from the bank. The question of financial charges and the related question that the contract is facet, because when you actually have a phone or power in your house, you sign a contract that say if I don't pay regularly, then I'll be subject to X percentage interest. And the same thing applies to the charge card. Now, if you want to be very literal, some scholars take it very literally without thinking and say, look, this aqd is facet, and it's true. But what is meant by fuqaha when they say this is aqd is facet? Because nobody normally in the past signed any contract like this unless there is riba involved. So what they meant that if I borrow money from you and say I return this money to you with the rate of interest of 10%, then it's aqd facet, it's wrong. But the reality here is different, and this did not face the fuqaha in the past. You need the electricity, and the aqd does not say that this is a ribawi, riba type of operation. It simply says that to guarantee our rights as a company, I'm not saying they're right, to guarantee our rights to make sure you pay on time. If you don't pay, we will charge you that much. So if it's your intention that you're going to pay on time, and if this is something you can't avoid because you can't have electricity without having this, then this is not a problem. And the same applies to charge card as well. But making sure that you pay within the limited time allowed for you, so you don't keep buying and say, I'll pay over so many months. Make sure that you don't pay a penny in interest, inshallah, it should be all right. Brothers and sisters who are in mortgage, already under mortgage for cars, or there's solution also for them. Even if you seek some Muslim brothers around you who are willing to help you get out of that, even with the incentive that they could get share, even if you have a small part, say, all right, let's agree on the rent and you will get some benefit, I get some benefit, and we get out of riba. So it's not hopeless. Actually, one of the ideas in the Islamic housing is to help people already under mortgage to pay off the remaining part, but still get some income from them. So I hope I tried to touch this as... I don't know whether we can get into that. Jazakumullah khair. I wish I could stay more, but unfortunately now it's really getting very, very tight. So Jazakumullah khair, and my apology. May Allah reward you all.
Jazakumullah khair, brother Jamal.
Thank you. Barakallah. Inshallah. Jazakum kulla khair.